Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Stonier. Thank you, Tracy. So yes, as they said, this is definitely meant to be an active discussion alongside the presentation. So no, it's not Q&A at the end. It's Q&A throughout. We'll have a couple spots where we'll definitely pause and explicitly ask, but please feel free to raise your hand or drop your questions directly in chat. And we're going to be directly answering them in chat or flagging them to bring them up to the whole group for discussion. And that'll be managed by myself and Connor and Heidi. So we're happy to kind of take over the flow of raising hands and calling you out when you've got something to say or you want to ask us. So to get started, next slide, please, Heidi. Great. So yeah, this is who you're going to hear from today or see in chat. I'm Rebecca. Connor, he's helped out with research for FEPPP before. You're going to hear a lot from Heidi later on in the conversation. Has been doing some really good research on the findings. And then we also have our summer fellow, Nathan, who's going to be a sophomore at USC and has been learning a lot about financial education. He's also on the call. So continuing forward, what are we going to look at? Next slide. Okay, there's really three big things we're going to show you today. So first of all, we've been collecting all this data and we have an initial financial education in Washington State landscape for you. Where is it happening? Where is it not? We also have data for you on what's going on with financial education vendors in Washington State. Who are they? How active are they? All that sort of stuff, as well as an overview finally about the grants that you've been hearing about in all of your FEPPP general meetings. We've done some analysis of looking across all three granting years. So that's what we're going to be showing you. Before we dive into these initial findings, we want to tell you about where this data came from and how we're continuing to collect it. So we've been running a survey. This data is all based on initial findings in an initial sample. This survey is still in the field. We would still love responses from school districts, and there's going to be a call to action at the end regarding this for all of you to help drum up more responses. But so far, this data is based on 107 survey responses, representing 87 unique Washington State school districts. That's about 29% of all Washington State school districts are represented in the data we're presenting today. The really cool thing is this survey sample right now pretty closely mirrors the student population of Washington State. So that's the chart you see below. We pulled up some key demographics. So our survey sample is representing approximately 55% students of color. Similar to Washington State student population is about 53% students of color. And this continues across English language learners, students with disabilities, low-income students, and districts with majority free and reduced lunch populations. This sample so far pretty well represents what Washington State student population looks like. Now, beyond the students, a little bit about the districts represented themselves. Next slide, please. So on the right here is a map of all the schools in school districts that have responded to the survey and are reflected in the data. Tons of them from across the state. We've also broken down all of the districts into small, medium, large, and very large. This is based on how many students they're serving. So small is under 1,000 students, very large if 15,000 students or more in a district. In this case, right now our sample, it overrepresents larger districts compared to the statewide composition. As we continue to push for more findings and survey responses, we really would love to hear from more small school districts. To tell you a little bit briefly about how we went about getting these responses, so we did direct outreach to all of Washington's school districts. We also used network outreach. So we used relationships we all have in FEPPPs with organizations in the state that were pretty closely connected with financial education educators. For example, we asked WACD, DECA, the Washington Council for Economic and Financial Education, if they could please share the survey, and similar organizations like that. And then we also did several rounds of targeted outreach to school districts when we saw that maybe we had low response rates in particular geographies or by school district size. And the survey was in the field from March through June. So again, this is the initial data set. We are still in the field and collecting more, but this is what's reflected in the data you're going to see today. Okay, on to what's the data say? Where is and isn't financial education happening in Washington State? Really amazing news. What we found is that 84% of surveyed districts are offering financial education in some way. This is without, of course, a state graduation requirement. That much of the state offering financial education, students getting some sort of touch and access to this information is pretty incredible. And then again, want to remind you, like, this is representing, definitely representing like what Washington State's student population looks like statewide is getting that access. So next slide, please. And then what exactly does this financial education look like? So 84% are offering it in some way. What we've learned about the delivery format is, so first of all, about 50% of responding school districts said they're offering it as an elective standalone course. 52%, this is the second bar, say that they're offering it and it satisfies a graduation requirement. For example, that could be a third-year math credit or similar. 43% said that the course is embedded in the CTE program in some way. And 36% said their financial education is embedded in a math course. We also know from the Washington State Board of Education that nearly half of districts with graduating seniors are requiring financial education for graduation. So again, really robust financial education delivery across the state. It's happening in several different formats, but it is happening very extensively. Next slide. Perfect. Now, a little bit more about where and how the financial education is getting delivered. It's mostly a high school experience. So it's being offered usually in grades 9 through 12 and even more so 11th and 12th grade. We did find out that 23% of responding school districts said they're offering it in middle school, 13% in elementary. 98%, offering it in grades 9 through 12 is a great structure, especially if a state graduation requirement does come in to fruition. But we also know, based on research, that if you want students to really feel knowledgeable and confident in financial education, they need exposure sooner. So the next gap on the horizon would be closing the K through 8 FinEd gap. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I have a question for the group.
I do have a question.
Please.
The 98%, for example, that is given, the data that is represented, does it represent the survey respondents or the unique school districts?
This represents the unique school districts. So in some cases, we received responses from multiple respondents from the school district. Sometimes they were a middle school teacher, sometimes they were a high school administrator, and we tried to bring that data together so that we could see if we had responses from the same school district, multiple responses from the same school district, like what's the full scope of their offering?
Thank you.
Yeah. What else? Questions?
I don't see any more. You have a question for us?
I do, yeah. So, my question is just that today you've heard that 84% of districts are offering some sort of financial education, and nearly half require it for graduation. So, I want to know, are folks surprised by that finding and wondering what surprised you most about where Washington stands today, or were folks expecting this?
Hi, Heidi. I can respond as a classroom teacher. Sorry, I didn't see if I'm not surprised by the data. I actually think I'm a middle school career and technical education teacher. And I actually think the data is probably lower than that just because of the number of respondents that you have. I am required to prepare kids for careers moving ahead. And I don't know if my district responded. I apologize to you for that. But in my school district, there is financial literacy curriculum posted on the front page of our LMS system. So every teacher in the district has access to different forms of curriculum. And I can tell you that that's part of every classroom that teaches middle school CTE just by the nature of our class when we make our frameworks. So to me, this data is not surprising. I think that the data is really kind of balkanized and it's difficult to get that. But I would think that the numbers at the middle level, especially with our students being required to take STEM courses, the integration of more CTE into different places, for example, science courses in my district are all STEM now, that I actually think that that number is low. Again, that's my perspective as a classroom teacher.
Thanks, Bobby.
I also wonder if how the data will skew in this next phase of data collection. Like it seems that folks that have a lot of engagement in the financial education space are likely to initiate like back quickly or quicker than folks that maybe don't know where their districts are or don't know where their instruction is, and may either need time or just it's not front of mind, so that's going to take them long to report unless if they do. But I will also point out like the number of districts that offer financial education, and that is not a graduation requirement is still only offered to some students in that student body. And so I wonder how that will be reflected later as well.
Mm-hmm.
Malay has a question.
Thank you. My question is, I feel that based on everything we've learned in our work at FEPP and how much we interact with educators, both those that are teaching personal finance without having received any prior training to teach it, and those who have, it's very different. And what I'm wondering is, of the percentage of educators that are teaching it and how many of them have been trained? Because I do feel like that makes a tremendous difference in how the students receive the instruction, because the confidence level for the educator is a big determining factor for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, ladies. I think that's a really good call out. I know two things to that point. One, Western Washington's University about course format, efficacy of financial education course formats. One of the major findings was just efficacy. A major part of efficacy around financial education comes from the educators' training and experience in it. And I know as we've been talking with smaller groups about this research over the course of this summer and spring, one of the things we've talked about is it'd be really interesting, exciting, helpful to understand quality of this financial education as well moving forward.
Can I also add, Rebecca, that I think where we will have the most accuracy is the more of our vendors that participate in this, the more we will see where the vendors are reporting that they have a presence. And I think that that's actually going to be a little more telling than only the teachers that are familiar with us that are filling up the survey, although it was a good starting point.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. And we'll have more on the vendors coming up in a few slides where we can fill some of the vendors on the call in on this. Thank you. So moving forward.
I think Pam had a question.
Oh, yes.
Hi, I couldn't find my raise my hand token. Do you have any idea what is the breadth of what's being offered? I mean, because I know for a fact that some districts would report that they offer financial education at the high school level when what they're doing is saying, oh, you can go to this website and take it. Therefore, we are offering it. And I think in terms of the number of students served, which is really what we're going after, this is a good start, but maybe we can dig in a bit more and see what that education is. And like Tracy said, who's offering it and how it's being offered.
Yeah, Pam, you either have clicked through the slide deck already or read my mind. This is what our next slide is. Thank you so much for bringing this up. We have a little bit of this answer for you all. Well, actually, it's 2 slides forward. So pausing for a moment, what we want to show you next is where financial education, actually, no, it's the next one. So Heidi, if you, yeah, perfect. Thank you. So where financial education is not happening in Washington State or how it's being delivered. So we asked about contact hours when survey respondents said they're offering it. So while 84% are offering it, the kind of gap in that offering we want to point you towards is the top 2 bars and the bottom bar. So of those who said, who responded, 11% said they're not offering financial education anyway. Then 11% of those who say they're offering it are offering it for under 30 hours a year. And then another 11%, this is the bar at the bottom, say they're offering it, but they didn't report how many hours. Now, we also know that research out from Western Washington University says that while teacher training is part of what makes financial education effective, the other part is a minimum of 30 contact hours. And so schools reporting under 30 hours, or they can't necessarily report that there's any hours happening at all. That's really where we want to think about, Pam, your question on, you say schools say they're offering it, but what does that look like? And is it maybe something just on a website that students or families can click through? And how can we make that financial education more robust? Great. Thank you, Heidi. So then a little bit more about where these lower dose financial education is being delivered. So what we found is that actually on the left side, you'll see this breakdown of districts meeting the meaningful financial education threshold that's usually between 30 and 60 hours at minimum. And actually very large school districts are offering, oh, slide 12, please. Very large school districts are offering it less than the other size school districts. Our hypothesis is just that the very large districts are going to have more variability between schools, and that it's harder to make a sort of uniform requirement of this is what financial education looks like in our school district. We'd love to study that more by talking to more very large school districts, but we're definitely seeing very large school districts are more likely to be offering lower amounts of financial education. And we also know that these very large school districts is where you're more likely to have students who could, who may have the highest need for financial education. And so, for example, higher rates of free and reduced lunch, higher rates of students of color, higher rates of English language learners, and higher rates of students experiencing homelessness. So next slide, please. So that's really when we think about some of the draft recommendations coming out of these initial findings. We've got 3 to consider. The first one is closing the access gap. So we'd probably want to target the approximately 23% of districts who are saying they're not offering financial education or offering it less than 30 contact hours a year. That should a state graduation requirement come into place, there's probably going to need to be implementation to support around curriculum guidance, embedded materials, and implementation in place. Just because there can be so much variability in the way financial education gets delivered. And then finally, to raise the floor on quality and equity, we're going to need to address the K through 8 gap to make sure that financial education is offered, that students really feel confident in it once they graduate from high school, because they've seen it before rather than once. Before we move on to data from Heidi, any questions on this? Yeah, ladies.
So one comment that I want to make on the third point in your previous slide was when you were highlighting the fact that 61% of districts rely on individually assembled curriculum. One of the reasons why it is important for educators to rely on vetted curriculum is that when an educator or an individual creates materials themselves, they put their bias in there, and it's not conscious, right? But it is because so many of our educators, and Washington State educators are fantastic, but there is a really big culturally, there's a big gap because a lot of our educators, almost 90% of them, identify as white. And as you mentioned, Rebecca, so many of our students are students of color. And when you have that implicit bias in materials because they're created from your experience, is very hard to connect with all students, even when you have the best intentions, and making sure that you're doing a good job with materials. Educators know how to create lessons, they know how to execute lesson plans. But when we talk about personal finance, it's not social studies and it's not math. It can be embedded in it, but it is different and it is sensitive, and it is important for content experts to create these curriculum, not because our educators wouldn't do a good job, but it is hard to catch those things when you create materials yourself. That's just one point that I wanted to make on why it is important to have educators look at materials that have been vetted and have been created by subject matter experts.
Yeah, really good flag. We have, we're giving you all the high, the big data points here, but we do have more data on the breakdown of what curriculums educators are using. And I'm really glad, Miladies, that you flagged this, that 61% of respondents were saying that they're using individually assembled curriculum. And again, that speaks to this variability challenges that are going to come into play when folks are, for example, inserting their own biases. Michael?
There's also a question in the chat from Matt Zuvich at the Treasurer's Office, which was along the lines of what my comment was about to be. And he's asking, if adopted, how would the proposed updated learning standards impact this information? And earlier, I think in the the introduction to this presentation, we heard how many times people are surprised to even hear that we have state adopted standards. And so all instructors and other contents are aware that you start with the standards, those are the curriculum, and that the resources, which are kind of viewed as curriculum in other spaces, are how you deliver on those standards. So I think if adopted, and if we can continue to communicate Washington State has adopted standards, teachers would have a starting place that is more aligned with the instruction anyways, and then folks are less likely to fall. If you can make sure that they are aligned with the standards, you're less likely to fall to a substandard instructional support or resource, because that might not be aligned with our standards. So starting with standards is always important. Communicating that we have them is secondly important. And then thirdly, should the proposed learning and standards be adopted, we'll have to push them out and continue to do so the way we've been trying, but probably get a little better at it. And this whole effort here helps with us doing that. Okay, Michael, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And I go back, and maybe it's a question for Milady based on what she said, and what she said was important. But I'm wondering, how do you know, because you have the curriculum, but how do you know that the bias isn't coming across on the way the assembled curriculum is delivered?
I don't think I'm understanding the question. Can you
So in
repeat
other
that for me?
words, teachers don't just regurgitate the material. They basically deliver it in whatever style they have. And there's two prongs to that. It's the prepared material and how you deliver that material. And so it's only a guide. And so unless you're actually seeing what they're doing, you don't know how it's being delivered and whether their biases may come across in just the way they deliver it as well.
That's a good point, and that's why I was talking about the fact that it's so important to have our educators trained to deliver this content, because I have seen what I would call good curriculum, and there is no perfect curriculum, right? And I'm talking just from like a bias and sensitivity perspective, not just the content. I've seen good curriculum have one lesson where I'm like, what is this? And it's the bias is in the lesson. And when you have a trained educator, you are able to teach that educator, hey, if there are 5 things in this lesson that work, take those things and then edit the sixth thing that is clearly not good and clearly has bias in there. Once you teach educators how to find bias in other curriculum and materials they haven't developed, it is easier for them to go back and say, oh, I can see how this lesson that I created maybe would not have landed with my students that have families from higher income or families from lower income. Because that's the thing, like, you're never going to have a classroom where all students come from low income backgrounds. And we have to be able to make connections with our students that are coming from financially strained households, as well as students who are not coming from financially strained households and have financial security. And that's not easy to do if you haven't been trained to do it. And that's where financial education is a little bit different from math and social studies, because you don't have to have that lens in terms of equity when you're delivering instruction for those content areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'll take it a step further, though. I would think, and I could be wrong, but for those people that feel less confident in their ability to deliver, or they're approached by a student with a question that they can't answer, that their bias would be more apt to come out because they're going to reflect back to their own knowledge, which could be inferior because they're not sure themselves. So
Yeah.
just points of consideration.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to highlight this in terms of like, in order to solve for the influences of bias, we have to do it both in the curriculum and the materials and also in support of the instructors. We're not going to solve all of it with one or even both, but we can make significant improvements by making sure we're watching all angles. Okay, good discussion. Thank you so much. Let's go back to our team here. Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you. We'll pass it over to Heidi to talk about what she found in the vendor landscape, but feel free to keep asking us questions, and this research is ongoing. So thank you for the discussion. Heidi?
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rebecca. Happy to be here and take over from this point forward. So, as part of our research of the financial education landscape, we looked at the roles vendors are playing in supporting delivery as well. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And please excuse my pauses. I've got quite the screen sharing setup going on right now. So, we identified over 160 financial education vendors active in the state. So Washington does have a strong vendor supply, which leads us to believe that uneven access to vendor support is more likely due to challenges in districts navigating this broad ecosystem and identifying the vendors that fit their needs, rather than there simply not being enough vendors present or available to districts. So therefore, a key priority moving forward is going to be supporting districts to make this broad ecosystem easier to navigate, compare, and to use. Within this broad ecosystem, vendors play many different roles, which you can see some of the top models broken down on this slide. You've got vendors that provide direct curriculum for teachers to implement in their classrooms, simulation and experiential learning programs, professional development providers, public resources, community partners, and financial institutions that provide presentations and more local insights, and then the broader organizations that support the ecosystem as a whole. And of course, many vendors play multiple of these roles as well. So all of these models play important roles in providing students with that comprehensive financial education experience that we're looking for. But this also means that districts have quite a crowded, oh, slides are skipping. There we go. But they have quite a crowded ecosystem to navigate and will need support identifying where their implementation gaps are and then identifying the vendor model that best suits the gaps that they have. All right, so headed back to our survey data a bit, we found that districts frequently cited a handful of familiar vendors you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide, including NextGen Personal Finance and FEPP's Resource Collection as the first and second most cited. What's really great about this is that the vendors districts are citing are vendors with FEPP approved curriculum and high quality resources, which gives a great launching pad for turning these familiar vendors into more sustained support for districts. On the flip side, this recognition may influence districts to select the vendors that they recognize or hear about the most, rather than selecting the vendor that is best suited for their unique implementation needs. So just highlighting FEPP's work is critical then for helping districts identify the vendors that best fit their gaps, rather than defaulting to the ones that are most familiar. But what's really great is this collection of high quality familiar vendors gives a great pool of options to start from. So I'll pause for a second. I know we're covering a lot of info. Anything surprising or any patterns anyone sees in practice on how districts are selecting their vendors that would be great to share? Right. And if none, we'll continue on. Great. Oh, Michael, I'm seeing your hand. Oh, but on mute.
I try to stay off the audio too. Thank you.
Yep.
Might be helpful. I'm wondering as I listen to you and I look at this material, are the districts perhaps feeling so overwhelmed that it's not that they're not participating, but they just feel so overwhelmed they don't know how to participate and what to use?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great flag and something we're thinking we're seeing as well of there's so much to look at and so much to navigate. So as we continue on too, we'll just keep highlighting FEPP as that lighthouse in navigating all this complex this just massive list of options that they've got for vendor support. But yeah, great note there. That's exactly what we're seeing as well.
I'll just, for some additional research color, Michael and others, Western Washington's university's research on the course format efficacy on financial education also talked to a lot of educators and about what they need. And one of the big things that was asked was, have you ever not been able to find a financial education resource you really needed on any topic? And every single one of them said, no, the problem is I don't know where to start. Because there's too much, there's almost too much out there for them to navigate.
Love it. Thanks, Rebecca. It's great.
It's just following up on that too. It would seem that our numbers, the districts that aren't participating, if this is the reason, it wouldn't be very hard to address this and then have those numbers increase to where there'd be more participation too.
Can I just make a note on that, Michael? I don't think it's that we're not seeing them participate. I think it's just been the situation we've always felt is getting the word out. How do we let them know that this is what we need? Any support, any member or partner of that can let them know we're looking for this information would help. But it's getting the responses, and I think it's just getting the word out.
Awesome. You all keep giving us great transitions into the next slide, so love it. Awesome. All right, I will continue on. So we do want to highlight FEPP as a strong example of what highly utilized support really looks like in practice. So districts aren't just using FEPP because their resources exist, but because those resources come with clear guidance, professional development, direct educator engagement, support for diverse learners, and a practical, like real starting point for delivery. So looking at that consistent educator engagement column, I just want to highlight as well that FEPP's webinars, trainings, and engagement events have reached over 2,000 participants across 241 districts and 937 schools, which just goes to emphasize their prioritization of working directly with educators and district staff, which we know is really, really important. This also just reinforces the broader point that strong resources become more valuable when districts also get active help putting them into practice. All right. And sorting through the support options available in this big ecosystem, as we've talked about, can be really difficult. So FEPP has already done the first step for schools and districts by reviewing financial curriculum, including instructional materials and programs. So FEPP ensures the resources they highlight have accurate content, are standards aligned, contain guidance differentiation to meet the needs of all students, are application focused, meet bias and sensitivity review requirements, as Milady's highlighted, and are centered around active learning. So just by completing this thorough review, FEPP resources tackle that first big barrier that schools and districts have in navigating this broad ecosystem, just making FEPP's resource collection a super simple starting point for selecting vendors and financial education materials. So back to Tracy's point on continuing to get that word out. All right, now we're going to dig back into some of our survey results. So we see that districts are using vendors, but these tend to be occasional rather than sustained supports. So we see the largest share of respondents falling into this category of occasional usage at 32.1%, which is the darker green bar at the bottom here, followed by 20.2% of districts reporting that they are not currently using partners, but are interested in doing so, which you'll see in the orange bar right above. So highlighting the opportunity here is then to shift those one-off partnerships into sustained support and then connect those interested districts to the vendors that fit their specific needs. We know FEPP already plays a critical role here with their work in connecting districts with partners. So this data just supports the need for that ongoing work. All right, as our first few data points, anything surprising in these results or additional thoughts to share after seeing these?
Looks good, Heidi.
Amazing. All right, we'll continue on. All right. There we go. We also see that the greatest gap is with small districts, as 34.4% of small districts reported that they're interested in partnerships but do not currently have them, as shown by the red bar on the top of this slide. So we also know that small districts are the least likely to have the resources and capacity to find and manage these external partnerships on their own. So this comes back to what Rebecca highlighted early on, that small districts just continue to need to be a priority for support moving forward. Great. So this takes us to what do we do with all this information? So our findings lead us to a couple different recommendations across really all players in the financial education ecosystem. So first, we advise districts to first diagnose the gaps in their current financial education implementation so that they can select the vendors best suited to fill those gaps. FEPP is an excellent resource for both the diagnosis and the vendor selection pieces of that process. So a key recommendation here is to really leverage that support. For educators and districts navigating the vendor ecosystem, we recommend using FEPP's reviewed resources as the starting point for identifying high-quality materials. For policymakers and funders, we're just reiterating that small districts should really be prioritized for support, and directing any funding available to those districts is just a great place to start. Finally, for FEPP, ESDs, and regional partners, to resolve the gaps we're seeing in meeting district interest with sustained vendor support. This just means continuing the existing work of connecting districts with high quality vendors and also prioritizing the districts that need the support the most. All right, so we'll pause here. Next section is going to be covering the grant report. So just want to make sure we've got time for any questions or anything surprising before we move on into that next section.
All right, I have a methodological question. In your assessment, how representative are your findings? I presume you used a convenience sample, and I presume you did not weight the data, and there's overrepresentation of the larger school districts. So a lot of information here is about small school districts, but how representative is that really of the larger landscape?
Great question. So this is using the same survey as Rebecca had mentioned at the start. So it'll be the same districts that participated and that same breakdown. So completely correct in the representation being a little bit skewed based on the response to our survey and the sample that we had.
Okay, so you guys did not do any weighting for the data.
No, Rebecca, just looping you in here as well.
Yeah. Two things. One, this is the initial survey data. So survey's still in the field, and we're trying to bring the imbalance of larger school districts to smaller districts more even over time as we collect more data. And then two, no weighting in any of these results. I think one of the challenges with the survey and structuring it and going about our targeting is we want to have a survey that reflects the infrastructure of districts, right? Because different size districts are going to have different resources available to them, but also the student population, it can be very different between those size districts. So if we were to have a sample that exclusively represented, was totally even on it's 51% small school districts are in the sample, and I think technically out of all school districts in the state, it's 10% are very large. So that would be, we'd have a sample that was reflective of the school district infrastructure and resources, but then we would have other things like student population and demographics underrepresented. So we've been trying to target a sample that splits the difference, and we're continuing to do that so that we can get as much of a split between what are students experiencing, but also what are the district infrastructure resources available that are delivering the financial education. Feel free to ask a follow-up question if that wasn't entirely clarifying.
I think this may be more technical than for the broader audience, so maybe we could connect.
Yeah, happy to.
And I'll also note that I've dropped a PDF copy of the slides in the chat, so that'll have a little bit more information as well. If you're looking for something in the immediate, you've got that too.
Hey, Rebecca and Heidi, I have a slightly different, I guess, response to this one. I really appreciate the information on the broad vendor supply. The 160 vendors isn't surprising to me. I actually just took a look through my work email and then my personal email, and I think one thing to note here is it also depends on what, and I appreciate Jason's question, who is a great partner of ours and had was talking about the frustration in there. Since June 22nd, I've received outreach from 6 different vendors that provide free services in financial literacy, asking me if I would like to partner with them. Okay. And they're in a variety of areas. Some of them are national, some of them are more local. And I say that to you as any of us who are in the classroom and have done this work, we get, man, Jason, I apologize for this. Do I say solicited? We get asked to partner with folks regularly from different organizations. It's getting through all of that stuff. Some of these organizations have a thick political bias, I'd say, to the work that they're doing. Some of them are groups that offer, classroom support for our teachers who haven't been trained. And we can say, in any content area, you're going to learn more about that. But navigating all of that, it could be, and some of the folks are very much on you. They will make phone calls. They will try to get with you regularly. They will offer you different things. And I just say it's so broad, and not trying to make assumptions about these different organizations, but we do receive. I receive lots. Like I said, six outreaches since June 22nd I've received personally as a financial education teacher. So I just think that's something to think about if you're going into this and you don't have maybe that level of understanding. Again, why I think FEPP's such a great resource as well. You get exposure, you get to learn different things, you get to talk to other people. But that there's not a lack of the outreach happening from the vendors. I'm sure internally they're thinking, well, what's the best way to get connected with these teachers? What are other ways that we can do this? But that's the reality of us that are sitting in the classroom. It's not for a lack of resources necessarily. We can't look in an email about, what the quality of the curricula is, but that's just the reality of those of us that are in this space when we're looking at different things. It could be literally the person at the organization hit the right person to connect with at the district, and they made a connection or something else. But that's again the reality that we face in the classroom, and not for a lack of resources, but understanding how to go through all of this material and see which ones are good and which ones are somebody that's just trying to sell me something, right? So thank you.
Looking at the chat as well. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's something we had discussed as well, where you don't want vendor recognition to be, or vendor selection to be based on marketing budget or outreach budget. So that's a great, I love hearing that in classroom experience as well, or teacher side of the experience as well. So thank you for highlighting that. All right, well, I will take us into our next section, which is going to be giving an update on the grant side of things. Screen is updated, perfect. So you'll see on this map on the left-hand side the statewide reach of the grant, as well as the impact over an estimated 3,500 teachers and 257,000 students on the right-hand side. As the 2025 to 26 year wraps up, we have 54 school districts completed to date. And we'll note here as well, as Lance had mentioned early on today, that since this year is not fully closed out until likely September, some of the data you'll see is still preliminary until the year is completely closed. So speaking of this 2025 to 26 year, the third year of the grant, this has also had generated the most applications and requested funding, which just signals that districts continue to have demand for support in implementing financial education within their schools. Right, and each district was required to share their financial education goal in their grant application. And we saw some interesting variety in how they use the grant funding as a lever to reach those goals. So we saw districts leverage funding to build teacher capacity and skills through training, stipends, release times, and training lead teachers to train other teachers. We also saw funding going towards increasing access for younger grades and priority populations, building in more hands-on learning opportunities to boost student engagement, integrating financial education into new parts of students' days at school, building partnerships and community relationships, and introducing new financial education content and resources. We also wanted to show a couple case studies of how exactly districts leverage funding to resolve their unique implementation challenges, starting with Mount Vernon School District. So going into the grant, Mount Vernon wanted to increase support for teachers to attend financial education trainings, increase the percentage of grade schools with teachers that have attended a financial education training, increase financial literacy units taught in the school year K through 12 wide, and to increase the quantity and utilization of financial literacy books in reading programs and libraries. So with their funding, FEPP was brought in to train librarians to act as emergency substitute teachers by using financial education books and reading materials that were previously underutilized to be teaching materials. So this then created a new pool of substitute teachers to tap and put underused resources into play. I'll also highlight that this approach has now been used as a peer model for a couple other districts as well, just in how to up their financial education delivery. On the other side of the state, Battleground acts as another great case study, which we were lucky enough to get an overview of from Allison. So we'll keep this short and just highlight two key aspects of this training and curriculum identification was that districts focused on extending, or this district specifically, focused on extending financial education to elementary and secondary grade levels, and also prioritized inclusive strategies to ensure education was reaching all types of learners in the district. You can see in these green bubbles some of the things we heard from the teachers and staff involved in the training, with many of the notes FEPP received mentioning the impact this training had on teacher confidence, as we also saw from Allison, which was just really great to see. Overall, these two districts just really took advantage of not only the funding, but also the expertise and in-person support of the FEPP team, which really made a difference in their offerings and teacher preparedness. So I'll take a pause here. Any questions or comments on these two spotlights?
Heidi, did you have another slide for Battleground? We're still on Mount Vernon.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Right, if not, we will continue on. Make sure the screen updates. Perfect. Okay, we also wanted to share a bit more about the reach of the grant, first looking at reach by district enrollment size. So while all sizes of districts participated, we see again that small districts fall a bit behind in terms of participation, as they participated at a lower rate relative to their statewide presence, with 11 out of 152 small districts participating. So just highlighting once more that these small districts are going to be a priority moving forward. We also saw that grant funding reached the student populations that are likely to benefit the most from strong and consistent financial education. So 45% of grant recipients have a majority of students eligible for free or reduced lunch. 46.1% of students in grant recipient districts are low income. 49% are students of color. 13.8% are English language learners, and 15% are students with disabilities. So we know that these students and communities are central to resolving the wealth gap we have in Washington State. So while these groups continue to be a priority for financial education, it's great to see that they're being reached by this grant funding as well. All right, finally, we've heard from districts what they need from the broader financial education ecosystem and just have some direction to share on how we can all support in increasing high quality financial education. So first is just to continue to highlight FEPP as the starting point for resources and implementation support for districts. Alongside this, elevate peer models like those of Mount Vernon and Battleground to give districts fresh ideas on how to implement financial education for their students and prepare for a potential future graduation requirement. FEPP has also pulled together some additional case studies on districts that participated in the grant that they plan to share as a resource in the future. So keep an eye out for that. We know that districts continue to need partner support, so it's important to continue bringing those implementation supports to the table in your communities. And finally, highlight FEPP's responsive implementation materials, as districts are particularly looking for materials that reflect students' economic realities, cultural context, and lived experiences. FEPP has these resources, so highlighting and sharing them is a step towards districts knowing that those are available. Great. All right. And then before we close out and open for some more questions, we just want to reiterate that this research is ongoing and we would love your support in continuing to build out this picture of financial education in Washington. If you're a teacher, principal, school or district staff member, or connected to anyone or groups of people, folks in those roles, we would greatly appreciate you sharing your insights to the linked survey, which we'll drop a link in the chat as well, and sharing that survey with any of your connections. On the other side, if you're part of a vendor organization, it would be amazing to better understand your organization's reach and impact. So we have a shared drive folder set up where you can drop in any data you can share with us or email it to the email address mentioned below. Feel free to send us any questions there as well. So I'll pause. Any questions or additional thoughts?
Do you mind if I answer John's question in the chat?
Oh, please do. Yes.
So, John, we're kind of seeing a little bit of everything. All of the districts are tied into what's called EGMS, which is the grant system through OSPI. So that's really was our launching point using the grant managers that were already identified in the system. And so we've done multiple blasts for the last 4 years about the grant opportunities through that grant system. It just simply wasn't enough. We've advertised it through our weekly bulletin. We've advertised it in every conference that we've gone to. Our fellows have sent the word out. And honestly, it's just been the little engine that could, trying to gradually get the districts to know about it, but it's definitely been a challenge. I mean, the treasurer's office has also done their part to try to meet with, as you know, we did those roads show on the road last year with the superintendents. Sometimes it's the teachers that were advocating for it and their districts were not interested. And for an example, like Auburn, they had that as part of their strategic plan. That opportunity came and they saw that as a great support to the work that they had already had on the books for a strategic plan. Hope that answers.
And we're happy to answer any questions over email as well if they come up as you sit with the deck a little bit more, or check out the survey and any questions come up there. Otherwise, Tracy, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much. We still have a lot of work to be done identifying the whole presence of financial education, but hopefully I'd love your thoughts and comments, everyone, about, are you surprised? Like, we really have covered a lot of territory. If you look at just 250,000 students that we feel have been impacted just by the financial education grants themselves, while we know there are gaps, we still see that as when we've got 1.1 million students in Washington State and we've managed to cover a fourth of them, that's significant progress to what some people think is nothing happening. I wouldn't mind putting Mary Ziegert on the spot. Yes, I saw the look on your face. Mary is an example of an experienced educator. She's an elementary educator, and Mary we need more Marys in K-12. When she knows how to integrate financial education into every conversation she has in her classroom every day, and it's magical to watch her in action. So, Mary, do you have any quick thoughts just on how we could scale that to other elementary school opportunities?
I think reducing the fear with teachers and seeing how the connections are. Like I started with SEL, with social emotional learning. And when we were talking about sharing, and then it was like a natural pathway um, to talking about finances. And we talk about trust. And when we start talking about trust, would you give this person something if you didn't know them? What would you have to ask them? What kind of questions would you ask to build that trust? And then we move that all into financial education. I just think that if teachers stop to think about some of the conversations, they can naturally pick up these financial connections and it makes it easier. And the kids will grab onto it. They love learning about finances because they love bargaining, especially if they can bargain with their parents. Um, and they're very competitive in nature, so who can do more? Um, so I just think that the opportunities are there if teachers aren't so afraid to try. If they just relax and think about it, it's going to become a natural thing. Um, and I know a lot of teachers, especially in elementary, don't think that we have time on our plate because we have so much. But it's not adding, it's connecting. And that's how they need to think about it. You're not adding, you're connecting. And so I use it across the board.
Thank you,
That's
Mary,
all.
so much. Thank you, Mary. I know I put you on the spot. Michael, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mary, given her experience and the use of the curriculum in that, in your experience, what would be the most helpful to you to even make your experiences better?
Wow, that's a good question. um, I think what's most helpful to me is having that sense of um, ownership, that I can form those relationships with the kids and their parents. Um, so what's been most helpful for me is to make real life connections. Um, I have children who are couch surfing. They don't have a bed of their own. Many don't even have a place to call home. And so when I can make a connection to them as far as what do we value and why, um, I form a connection with them, they're more open to learning more. So it's just the basic teacher instincts of how to make connections. And when you form those connections, you can easily tie it to a financial concept. Opportunity cost is kindergarten on, kids learn that. I learned it for the first time, believe it or not, from Pam as an adult and an educator for over 20 years. I never heard the phrase. And once I heard it, I took it back to school, and now everybody's using it. So when the kids have a disagreement, they look at opportunity cost, and they don't even realize that they're doing financial choices. And as we move forward, we're connecting that. I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
The last ask I have of this group here, and we certainly can put it out to the larger group that may not have been able to be here, is to tell us other information that we might have missed with this landscape analysis. Is there other details or data that we should look forward to gathering that would help you see the bigger picture of financial education across the state? If there's any part of this story, I keep referring to it with Artemis every meeting. I'm like, it's not the whole story. We're trying to tell a story. It's the story. The story is the story. How much is there any part of this story that we've missed? So please feel free to email me, share it in the chat, and we'll be happy to put that into our consideration going forward. And then at this point, if there's no more questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Representative Stonier if she's at a place to jump back in.
Yes, I am here. Thank you to our friends at Artemis for the work that you're doing, for staying in close communication with us, and for continuing to make sure that the data set we have to share with others down the road is more representative both of school experiences and of student access. So thank you so much. We appreciate you.